This is Steve Orlins, President of the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, and I am very happy today to be joined by Gang Chen, who is the Carl Soderberg Professor of Power Engineering at MIT, and he used to be head of the Department of Mechanical Engineering at MIT. He's got a PhD from Berkeley, and is known not for what I have basically just said, but is known for having been the subject of a prosecution under the China Initiative that I want to talk about today, so that our listeners, our viewers understand how this originated, what happened, and what we should do going forward. I've been following the case from the day it started, and as I kind of reviewed the case, it kind of brought tears to my eyes, because it really put somebody who was an upstanding, good American into a real nightmare. I think you stood up for the right things. You were a model for those of us who speak out, whether we're in China or the United States, didn't compromise your integrity, and ultimately the charges were dropped. Talk first about kind of your background before this nightmare started. Who is Gang Chen? Where you came from, what your experience in China was, coming here, going to Berkeley, teaching at some institutions, and then your 21 years at MIT.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak here. I grew up in China. I was born in '64, so I spent a lot of my childhood during China's Cultural Revolution. But in '78, I was lucky. I enrolled in high school through exam. So those are the years when China started to reform. And I came to US in '89 after I received bachelor and master degree from then Huazhong Institute of Technology. And I studied at UC Berkeley under then UC Berkeley Chancellor, very famous Chinese American, Chang Tian. I got my PhD in 1993, went to Duke as an assistant professor. And then 4 years later, I was attracted to UCLA with a tenure offer. So I went there as associate professor with tenure. And another 4 years later, I was attracted to MIT. So I joined the MIT faculty in 2001. And I've been here for 21 years. Really, I benefited so much from my grown-up life in US, in academia. Every university, I'm so grateful: Duke, UCLA, MIT. And particularly MIT, I spent 21 years. I grew my research, really worked with a large group of students, faculty. And through their hard work working together, I also received quite a lot of recognitions as an election to National Academy of Engineering. In 2013, I took over as the department head, because I thought it's really my time to pay back to the society. I benefited so much being a faculty member at MIT. I should pay back and serve our faculty and our students. So I led the department for 5 years until 2018. And I've been, returning to my research. I really feel, we have achieved American dream. I have a very loving family, one son and daughter, they all grown up. And all this were shattered when in 2001, January 14, when they came over, arrested me, and they really turned our American dream into a nightmare.
Talk about that a little bit. That, in reading about the case, they had spoken with you in December and said that there weren't going to be any charges. Then on 6:30 in the morning, as I read in the newspaper, the FBI entered the house, arrested you with your wife and children present. What went on? And I think it's important to note it was 6 days before the end of the Trump administration. So I think that's a relevant factor here. What do you think went on? And I ask it in the context, I worked in the US government for a number of years and dealt with the Department of Justice and the FBI. And by and large, these are pretty good guys. These are guys who are interested in going after real bad guys, not fake bad guys. And they join these institutions for the right reasons. What went on here?
Steve, that's a really good question. In terms of timeline history, I started to realize that I was under investigation in January 2020. I think around the 22nd January, when I and my family returned from an international trip, going through the Logan custom. I was detained for a few hours, and at the end, I was questioned and all my electronics were taken away. After I came back to MIT, I wrote to the MIT leadership. They were very worried. They actually got me a lawyer, paid my lawyer, and they also hired another independent lawyer for MIT. So there are actually two external lawyers working and looking into my record through the entire 2020. And by December, they talked to the prosecutor, and the prosecutor told them there are no imminent indictment, at least not in 6 months. I think the reality is that they were all thinking about leaving. And yet, on January 14, 2021, less than a month after they told both my lawyer and the MIT lawyer, and they came to my house and arrested me. And that's to say 6:30 a.m. around that time, I was making coffee, and I saw really between probably 10 to 20 federal agents came to my home and pounced at my door. And then when I opened, they asked if I were Gang Chen, and they ordered me not to move. My wife was in sleep, and my daughter was also in sleep. And my wife later told me a policeman, a man actually was on her bedside, asked her to wake up, get up. And she thought she was in a dream, and opened her eyes and saw a man just standing by. That's a really traumatic experience. I believe what you said. I believe most people in the government, DOJ, FBI, most people join to do the right thing. In fact, two of my lawyers, right, Mr. Rob Fisher and Mr. Brian Kelly, work in those offices. They're good guys, but they also the other facts in my case, right? The U.S. Attorney Andrew Lenin at the time, he had, like you said, less than a week to go in the presidential transition, just rushed to the indictment. And this was indicated by the prosecutor to my lawyer on the day I was arrested, that they rushed the case. And it's just surreal to me that the people working in the government really placed their career above ordinary people's innocence. In this case, it's my belief with the Andrew Lenin, and so actually facts, the Andrew Lenin and the FBI special agent, Mr. Joseph Bonaventure, that they had a news conference, and during the news conference, they really distorted facts to paint me as a criminal, to question my loyalty to US. And I thought that it's really, when you have misguided policy, like China Initiative, you have a zealous people like Andrew Lenin and Mr. Balamonto really place their career above facts, above, say, the innocent people. And that happens. The tragedies like those happens because of the policy together with the zealous people.
There was, so the prosecutor who was lower down felt that they shouldn't do it at this time, but the more senior people who knew they had 6 days left decided that they should bring the case. Is that what you speculate?
Yes, that's pretty clear from the timeline and from the facts that the prosecutor was telling my lawyer there are no prosecution in the next 6 months in December, and yet within less than a month they came to arrest me, and they indicated to my lawyer that they rushed the case. And it was even, I remember the day my lawyer said, in this case, the chief prosecutor was Stephanie Sigman, and she said that she was most angry that I served as a reviewer for China's Natural Science Foundation. And there are two problems with this. One is that if you ask any active researcher, we all do reviews for different organizations, including foreign funding agencies. And the fact is, if you go to US Department of Energy, ask them, they go abroad to find the impartial reviewers because sometimes they can't find impartial reviewer. They think they cannot find the impartial reviewer in US, and they go abroad. So those are really academic norm. So that's one problem. The second problem is, in my specific case, although doing review has nothing wrong, but in my specific case, I was so busy, I actually never did a review for China's Natural Science Foundation. They did not do their homework. I just received all those email requests. We all receive email requests, but yet they say I was a reviewer.
Was that morning of January 14th the darkest, or were there times, the darkest moment, or were there times subsequent to that when it even got darker?
I think there are many dark times, certainly that day. In fact, I must say, when I first saw them coming, because I knew I was already, at the time under investigation, I had a lawyer. So my immediate reaction was, actually, this is so stupid. And it was not fair at the time. When I was taken away, I was in prison and sometimes shackled, handcuffed. I still was not that fearful. I was only worried how my wife was doing, because by the time they took me away, my wife was talking to them. And that was just so worrisome, because we all know that this case is you should not talk. That's all the lawyers' advice. And also, I was worried, how could I tell my parents in China they say they are old, right? They are weak. And I was worried that they would not be able to survive the news. And I was worried about my son. He was going to start a new job the next week. So all those, they're worries. But see, it was very sad the night that I came back from prison after I was bailed out.
How many days were you detained?
One day, during the day, my lawyer bailed me out.
So there was an arraignment, bail was set.
Right.
There was an arraignment in front of a federal judge, bail was set. Somebody paid the bail and you were released.
Right. I was released the same day. And it was surreal when I came back, look into my home. There were no electronics, and the storage area was a mess because they had a one-day search in my house. And that next few days was just a terrible. We lost, both my wife and I lost over 10 pounds. And it was very difficult to hear my wife crying in her dream. Woke him up in her dream, I hear her crying, and this happened often. So that's very difficult.
Yeah. So this occurs. Did the FBI have weapons drawn, by the way?
They did not draw their weapon. They knew I had a lawyer, and they knew. They actually told my lawyer. I said I need to talk to my lawyer. They said he already know. Right? They informed my lawyer on their way to come to arrest me.
Yeah. And they chose, because I guess they wanted to seize the electronics, they chose not to tell your lawyer to have you surrender at the federal building in downtown Boston. They could have often, in cases, the police or the FBI just say the defendant can surrender because you're not going to harm anybody. But I guess they were worried you would, in the theory, destroy electronics. So this was pretty serious prosecutorial abuse. And it's not the first time, as you know, and it's not going to be the last time. Are there any actions that you're contemplating? Are you trying to get discovery? Are you bringing a case in front of the Massachusetts bar for misconduct by the lawyers involved? Fortunately or unfortunately, immunity for federal prosecutors is absolute. It's very difficult. But if there was prosecutorial misconduct, the Bar Association could suspend the license of the offending lawyer.
Well, this is, like you said, it's very difficult to prosecute the people in power. But I am working with Congress. I'm respectfully demanding their thorough investigations of the misconducts by FBI, by other agents in the process. Clearly, there are a lot of wrongdoings. They distort facts, they hide facts. In fact, the same day they arrested me, they interviewed the witness. The witness said that I was not in the talent program they accused me of. And those, my lawyer told me, those so-called Brady material, by law, US law, they need to turn over to my defense team. And yet they did not. In March 2021, they interviewed the MIT grant specialist in charge of DOE grant. And she said that I did not violate the rules. And again, those are Brady material. They should turn to my lawyer. They hide it, and we knew they have it. And until November, we decided to really ask them. And we knew that's wrongdoing. And it was at that time, after we asked it to turn over more Brady material, they hide a lot of those materials that by law, they know law better than anybody else. And yet they hide them. And it's just full of misconducts like this. They distorted facts, right? MIT corrected their the facts. They said I took $19 million. And in fact, on the day they were in my home, my wife told me later that she asked one agent, "What's my crime?" And the agent said, "He took $19 million. And my wife said, "Where is that $19 million in my home?" And the agent said, "At the MIT." They knew it's at the MIT, yet they painted the way you look here, listen to the news conference. It's like, I embezzled $19 million.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
all the kind of misconduct.
Why did it take the Biden administration, the new U.S. attorney, so long to drop the case? It was more than a year.
It's actually interesting. The new U.S. attorney was appointed sometime probably in May or June, but her confirmation was stalled at the Congress until, I forgot, November, around the time. And she wasn't, she didn't start her position until just the week after, she started her position, my case was dropped. So it took a long time for her appointment to be confirmed.
But there was an acting U.S. attorney who was no longer the U.S. attorney when you were indicted, right?
That's true. So there was an acting U.S. attorney, and then in fact, by December, my lawyer was already negotiating with him about dropping the case. And it was around that time they were talking about the dropping the case.
Yeah. So in December, it became clear that this ordeal was going to end in some not too long a time frame.
Right. In fact, in October, the prosecutors already was proposing to us, which my lawyer said that it's very rare. They approached my legal team and proposing a deferred prosecution agreement, which is a sign that they want to get out, right? And they know from the beginning they rushed the case, and their investigation didn't find anything against me, and they want to get out, and yet they still want to save their face, and with deferred prosecution agreement.
So you rejected that?
It was difficult because we really didn't know. My lawyer said this could take a long time, right? And we didn't know this would end. But I just asked myself whether I could live with it, right? And it was difficult, but at the end, after a lot of debate, discussion with my wife, I decided to reject it. I just couldn't live with it.
From your perspective, so the Biden administration, the new assistant U.S. attorney for national security, has dropped, quote, the China initiative and kind of put in place a new kind of prosecution way of prosecuting, which deals with all of these issues, doesn't focus on Chinese or Chinese Americans. Does that kind of end it for you? Are you satisfied?
No, I certainly feel some relief that they dropped the name. I watched the not the news conference, the sort of webinar type of during which Matt Olson announced the name change. But so there's certain satisfaction to hear that, but also their disappointment in the fact when he said perceived a low standard. those are not perceived, those are facts. If you look at how many the existing indictment as the MIT Technology Review and also NOR 360 analyzed, right? And I believe the success rate is less than 50%, and compared to DOJ's more than 90% success rate in prosecution, that's a clearly low standard, right? And also the fact that he said he reviewed all existing cases and decide they'll continue the prosecution. And those really did not give me a good feeling about their substantial real change. And I must say, I have not seen real change. After my case was dropped, I learned there was an FBI agent visiting a university faculty, somebody I knew visiting his home. I learned another faculty, when he passed through airport, he was questioned for an hour. So those things still continue, and they create a really huge chilling effect to the entire scientific community, and that's detrimental to US and to the world.
How should the American people think about the conviction of Charles Lieber over at your institution up the Charles River, the partial conviction in the last few days of Feng Tao at the University of Kansas, and a bunch of other convictions? How do we separate that from the bad prosecutions, the prosecutions based on, wrong materials, distorted evidence?
Yeah, that's a very complicated question. I think probably we could use Hu's case as example. When Judge Varland ruled, say in his ruling, acquitting Hu, even there was a hung jury, 10 people voted guilty and 2 say insisted non-guilty, right? I remember Judge Varland say in his ruling opinion, he used he is a example of what's a wire fraud, and he gave an example: a man called the labor, he wanted to change of $1 into 4 quarters. He called his labor and say lied that say his son is ill, and when the labor came over, he asked to change $1 into quarters, and so the labor did that and left. And there are 2 scenarios he pointed out. One was that the dollar was real. So in that case, although he probably lied to get labor over, but there was no harm done. And the other case was he gave a counterfeit $1. And in that case, it's a wire fraud. In the first case, it was not wire fraud, right? So that's the example he gave. And he concluded that, say, in Hu's case, even in the most favorable consideration for the government, there's no harm done, right? That's why he
no crime.
Acquitted Hu. So I think people need to ask those questions, right? The China initiative started to find spies. Did they find spy?
What about Lieber? He wasn't a spy, but he certainly abused his position.
Well, let's see, I have not really thought more from the legal perspective. From a science perspective, I have great respect for Lieber as a scientist. Yeah, it's a big loss for the scientific community.
In my view, despite the people who created the China Initiative, obviously created on the last day of Jeff Sessions' term as Attorney General, they kept saying this wasn't an attempt to discourage U.S.-China cooperation in the sciences. I don't agree with that. I think they actually were trying to kind of decouple the scientific community in China from the United States. Do you think they kind of have succeeded? That it's tougher to get Chinese graduate students at MIT or at Berkeley or at Caltech or wherever, because they kind of go, I can go elsewhere.
I completely agree with you. And yes, certainly, I think that they have partially succeeded in creating this chilling effect in really slowing or halting the talents coming in from China, coming to US. Unfortunately, that's to the detriment of the US and to the world. Recently, there is a survey conducted by Asian American Scholar Forum. The survey including over 1,300, almost 1,400 university faculty members, most of them Chinese heritage. These are in US. And 90% of the survey felt it's more difficult to attract talents from China than 5 years ago. And so really, anecdotally, I was talking to a faculty member from another university, and he told me that this year they didn't get any applicant from Tsinghua University in China. This is a top US university in his department. They did not get any. That's very different from before. And clearly, I think those actions, the program and the fear created are halting talents coming. And also anecdotally, I talked to people in other countries, and they got better students now.
Yeah, so it's a diversion from the United States
Right.
to other places, and probably some stay in China.
Yeah.
That in the natural sciences, in the STEM fields, Tsinghua, the others are pretty good places to end up. I think in the social sciences, China's the way they're running the social sciences these days. It's still problematic for the best students to stay because research is being kind of directed in a way that makes it not very pleasant to stay if you're in a sensitive area. What should the United States government do, going forward? Your case is truly a tragedy, but you stood up. I mean, in every way, shape, or form, you did the right thing. You were fortunate that you were at MIT, and MIT stood with you and provided counsel. I think Professor Hu was more, University of Tennessee was less supportive. I think University of Kansas was less supportive of Fang Tao. But what should the US government do? What should the Congress do? How do we kind of legislate our way through this? Or is it really just impossible? We just need to shine the bright light on these cases. And when you do, people go, oh my gosh, this shouldn't have happened. They were the cure for the disease was so much worse than the disease that we need to stop this. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a very good question. You mentioned that I'm lucky. I do want to emphasize that I'm the luckiest among the unlucky people. Really, I have the MIT leadership support. The MIT faculty stood up very quickly and voiced in their open letter and stated that we are all Gang Chen, right? They analyzed the facts. Yeah. And the entire scientific community, really many people stood up and spoke for me. So I'm the luckiest among unlucky people. I think the damage it created this, say, wrongful prosecutions, mine and other people, really is harming the U.S. Really is, again, I mentioned this survey, and the survey showed that 64% of the surveyed are fearful of the U.S. government, our own citizens are fearful of our own government. And 67 of those surveyed are considering leaving the country. Those are the over 1,300 researchers, university professors. It really is a loss of talents, the deterrence of talents from coming in. And US, we are a country built on our ability to attract talents from around the world. And the government people, the government leaders need to recognize this is damaging to US, damaging to the world. And I think Stephen Chu, the Nobel laureate, US Department Secretary, right? Department Energy Secretary, in his words, were shooting close to our head. And the government need to recognize this and need to be, it's hard, but amid the mistakes made, right? It took, in the history, it took many, many years to meet those mistakes, right? Chinese Exclusion Act, the Japanese encampment during World War II, and there are others, and they never meet, right? And in the 60s to 80s, there was secret FBI surveillance of Chinese scientists. And the history kept repeating itself. I hope the government can do a thorough investigation and really hold the people in power, abusing power, accountable for their misconducts. And in my case, I'm lucky I got many people's support, and I hope more and more people stand up to speak out against those discriminations and really using people's power to force the politicians to do the right thing.
Yeah, and which is the purpose of this program, is to get our hopefully tens of thousands of viewers to understand what happened here, and when we see it happen again, to speak up. Last question, because we're out of time, is so what is the future now for Gang Chen? What you're back at MIT, you're teaching, you're recruiting graduate students, I assume, to work with you. What's your future?
Yeah, in my case, really, it created a big damage to my scientific career. My group originally had 15 people at the time I was arrested. And by now, I only have 3 people. And I lost some critical continuity. But I'm not going to be beaten. And I will find ways to continue my research. I'll probably not apply for government funding anymore. I'm just so fearful for filling any forms and given my experience. But I'm not going to be beaten. I guess the other aspect I emerged, this experience taught me that we have to speak out. We people hold the power. We need to speak out. Just as my colleague, when this is Professor Yor Fink, when he organized the MIT faculty, he did not know MIT leadership was actually covering my legal fee at the time when I was arrested. That was the day I was arrested. He prepared a deck of slides, and the last slide, he cited this poem by Martin Niemöller, which read, "First, they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And then they came to me, and there was no one else to speak out. It was probably not the full recital, but it's very powerful. And I got another email from a African American friend, and he sent me Martin Luther King's quote, right? Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. I keep those words to my heart, and it's people have supported me. It's my time to help people more. Yeah.
Well, this has been a very powerful interview. I hope we get tens of thousands, and I can see why the MIT faculty said we are all Gang Chen, and we are all Gang Chen. And I thank you so much for standing up, fighting this, being true to your values, true to our values, and being a great American. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, everybody.